Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So so now where are you right now, Will?
I'm at home, just outside San Francisco, California. This is a fake video background, not in a real life.
Yeah. Really? Huh.
I can actually, if you want a more interesting place to work, let me show you this one.
Yeah, we've got a couple of guys who drop in. We try to figure out where they are every day.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
Oh, hey, it's Top Gun.
So now, yeah, I just I sit there in my pilot seat, then we'll take off. This is a F-16 coming down the runway.
Yeah.
Makes meetings a little more interesting.
That's great.
Okay. Well, well, thanks for agreeing to do this. You know, we've got oh, I actually got the wrong, printed out the wrong piece on the outline. But I presume we all have the outline that and the breakdown that Josh provided. And you were going to do an intro, Josh.
Yep.
And have you got that more or less scripted?
No, I don't. I was hoping we could flesh out the session, and then the intro would reflect that.
Okay.
But I was thinking we might start with Mark O'Brien's story just to alleviate any skeptics out there, and then go on to more complex and involved models that we want to talk about.
So how long is your story, Mark? Or what are you going to reduce it down to, I guess would be the question.
Whatever you tell me. I can tell it in 30 seconds or 30 minutes. So I assume you want like a 3-minute version or something like that. I actually have 2 stories, Josh, that I think are relevant here.
Okay.
I'll just give you the highlights, and then we can talk about how much detail you want. So the first use case, if you will, rather than story, is for public safety, which is something that we've been working on for over a decade now, using ATSC-1 capabilities. And we got a project that was funded by the state of Tennessee that gets revenue to the stations that are contributing bandwidth into this project, and also a considerable amount of funding to integrate content and to specifically help address the problem in Tennessee, particularly rural, like you were just talking about, Mark, where public safety might have good voice radios, but LTE isn't built out yet. They don't have data capabilities, and so they can talk to each other, but that's about it. And so we're marrying the LMR voice network with the broadcast television data delivery piece, and creating a new ecosystem, if you will, which is voice and data, which is combining those 2 systems together to solve this problem of they can't see the helicopter video and the drone video, and they can't get the latest updated crisis plan for the tornado that they're going in to help mitigate. And it's on the air, and it's got state funding. The stations are receiving bandwidth revenue, and we are managing the system, and it's working very well, and it's continuing to expand. That's been in place for about a year now. The other use case that is very recent that has come up just in the last few weeks is the education divide of the haves and the have-nots. And students who now have to continue their learning at home. If you have broadband, that's great, because most of the content that you need is oriented around putting it online and having students access it online. There are a couple of reasons that not every student has access to broadband. One is your scenario, Mark, where it's just not even available in some areas. More likely, though, is mom and dad just got laid off and had to cut back on their bills. And one of the first things to go was the cable bill. And now they're watching TV over the air. And the internet went away when the cable went away. And now they've been cut off. And so in South Carolina, the state, we have a really motivated GM of the public television network in South Carolina, which is actually 11 transmitters that cover the whole state.
You said this is South Carolina?
South Carolina, yeah.
Okay.
And so he started this saying, we have to find a way to help get content to the students who no longer have, who no longer can go to school and don't have broadband. And actually there was an article in today's Washington Post basically saying, this is the new normal. So even when this crisis is over, they're not going to fill up the school buses. They're not going to have students sitting next to each other in the cafeteria. There's going to be some element which is going to continue to require study at home. And so now it's even more urgent. What do you do to bridge this divide? And what we're building in South Carolina, and we're still in the building phase right now, is a system that will mimic internet content. And by that, I mean, this is almost the Akamai model, but we're doing it on a much smaller scale. We'll take the HTML web page and we'll take the files that web page links to, and we'll datacast all that out and put it on a laptop or a tablet or even a smartphone, so that the student can pull up an HTML page. It looks like they're on the internet. They tap on a link to get some content and they see the content. It's just all cached locally on the device that they're consuming that content on, rather than actually actively linking out to the internet. And so here's the funding piece of that. That's not just a science experiment. There is just shy of $18 billion with a B that has been allocated to the governors of every state from the federal government to help solve this problem of the haves and the have-nots. And so we're going after funding in all of the states to get a portion of that, to be able to expand what we're doing in South Carolina and to get compensation back to the stations and to us to build this system to build out the education piece nationwide. So there's two really practical data casting use cases that have funding connected to them. So what was that, 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes?
No, I think that was a good, 4 minutes or so, and useful. I mean, those are the kinds of plans that that we would have for ATSC3. The biggest, this would not be my spin for the call, but getting broadcasters to understand that there is sort of a collective approach to making this happen. As you know, in the ATSC, they've now launched another planning team which has got the likes of HPE and IBM and others to develop a broadcast core. Because clearly the way that no matter how many stations you aggregate and pull together into a collective, into a federation of sorts, the problems remain of how do we view those as a virtual single but flexible entity, and how do we provide the access to the traffic control of the bandwidth that's available, and so when you look at the rollout that's anticipated for 2020, and it has been impacted by by COVID. But when you look at the markets that are slated to turn on in 2020, and I'm asking for permission to show these. I mean, what you begin to see is that a sizable portion of the United States is in fact going to end up being lit up. And just to give you a sense, here are the transition markets. by ranking, and these are all on the left. These are the markets 1 through 20, and actually 21 through 40 that are in line to be turned on in 2020. And in the context of looking at the broadcast owner groups, what you see is it's varied. It's it's by networks largely because this is the Pearl. We're part of Pearl now, but this is part of the Pearl activity, and it is very focused on largely getting the network engagement. And I say that, and it's clearly not just networks. It's Hertz, Scripps, you see Hubbard, Nexstar. You'll see as we go down below the top 10, there's a lot of Sinclair, but these are the markets that only intersect the Pearl members. And I'm in the process of generating another slide that will show the additional markets that we're working on. And what you begin to see being pulled together is a picture that a large part of the U.S. public suddenly can be reached with broadcast in a way that wasn't possible before. And I say broadcast in a way not possible before because this is an IP-based broadcast capability. And there will be excess capacity, particularly in some of these markets. You'll see that there are multiple stations that are being lit up. And those multiple stations add up to a tremendous amount of underutilized spectrum bandwidth. Right? So the question is how do we put that together? And our focus has been largely on the technology side, the enablement side, but we know that the business possibilities exist. The example that you just stated, Mark, is one, but I'm sure Will can do chapter and verse on other opportunities.
Hey, before we do there, let me just tie a bow around what I said because I buried the lead. I left out the most important part, at least for this discussion, which is everything that I just described I'm doing over ATSC1. So what's the urgency to do it for ATSC3? And in both cases, in the public safety case, obviously they can't be moving so I can get to the laptop in the front of the police car once they arrive at an incident scene. Well, that works, but it's very limiting. Well, that limitation goes away with ATSC3. Now they can get it wherever they are, whether they're in motion and have someone in the passenger seat can be looking at video while someone else is driving. We can't do that today. It also creates some urgency to get chips into phones, and we've had some conversations about using public safety as the foot in the door with the specialized vertical to prove the concept of the chips in the phones. And there's some interest from the specialty manufacturers to do that because they want people to buy their devices. And you don't have to be Samsung and be looking at 100 million for this to make sense. You can be Sonim and have it be 25,000 devices where it actually starts to make sense. So that's kind of the leap from what we're doing today to ATSC3. On the education front, we're also tethered so we can get this content to students at home on their smartphone or whatever over a Wi-Fi receiver that we're developing. But ATSC3 lets the students consume the content wherever they are. They don't have to be at home. So in this new normal, they may not be quarantined at home, but they're not going to be in school. So they can now on their smartphone or on their tablet or their Chromebook or whatever, get the content without the limitation of being tied to a physical location. So that's the next step that is important for this discussion, I think, tying it to ATSC3.
Mark, can you also mention how much money is being made by broadcasters?
Oh, well, yeah, it's an appallingly small amount of money. That's another slide that actually I was going to pull up. haven't joined these slides together, but you know, for the sake of Will, if no one else, you know, I'll bring up. Let's see, is this the?
Actually, Mark O'Brien, could you just quickly mention how much money is being made in your specific cases that you mentioned?
Yeah, in Tennessee, the stations are each being compensated $4,500 a month, and there's 6 stations. So 6 times 4,500 is what the compensation is to all of the participating stations there. Because this is state money, this is government money going to this, we're positioning it as offsetting the cost of providing the service. So really it's bandwidth revenue, and it is money flowing directly to the stations. They don't have to hire any additional staff. There's no, Spectra Rep manages the whole system, so all they have to do is make the null packets available and accept the content. And for that, they get $4,500 times each of the 6 stations. So to your point, Mark, it's not a ton of money, but you know, in Memphis, it's nice, but in Cookeville, Tennessee, it's a lot of money. So in these really small rural stations, they're actually quite appreciative.
Right. Well, we'll look at the, so this is sort of the valuation, and this slide is, it's about a year old. And, you know, you know, if we want to change the value of the wholesale price of wireless 4G, that's fine. But the point of this particular slide is to show that, you know, you have this, you know, this sort of progression from the value of an LTE bit to the value of a wired bit to the home, mm-hmm. to the value that we derive out of our own bits. And so it's an insanely low. You know, there's 2 places. Suddenly, what you're really talking about here is you're looking at the value, the cost, if you will, of a bit for a broadcaster is 1/10,000th that of an LTE provider. So, and that's, you know, that's derived based on current business. It's, you know, what's being made off of our Diginets and, you know, D2s, D3s, which could easily be replaced, you know, by other revenue sources. And this really doesn't even dive into the question of the flexibility, you know, that's afforded. The consortium, you know, this is, you know, I'm introducing the idea of a consortium, and you know, this is Spectrum Co. And with those that are members of Spectrum Co. and the stations that are included in a growing list, over 90% of the United States is covered. But I'd like to get to Will and a discussion on his part of what he sees as the realm of possibility, and how we, you know, how do we turn this into sort of an open collaboration to drive, you know, to drive value.
Thanks. Yeah. So, you know, I have all the news I'm going to bring is not all positive here. So I just want everyone to be prepared for that. So firstly, as Mark Aiken mentioned, we took an early look at data costing here very early on. Back in 2016, we did demos at NAB. We showed that technically it could work. We also hosted a hackathon at our corporate office so people could do next-gen TV, home gateway integration. So we've seriously taken a look at this. We're also in the data delivery business. So Akamai, for those who don't know, is the world's biggest content delivery network. And large file downloads are the things that are driving peak traffic today. These are gaming downloads and software updates. When your iPhone updates, everyone in the world's iPhone tries to update in the same hour or the same day, driving a very big increase in traffic. These peaks are roughly 20 terabits per second now is pretty typical. That's 20,000 gigabits per second peak, might last 8 hours. That and also large sporting events. So there's a definite need to deliver data. That being said, we see significant headwinds today with the use of ATSC3 data costing, and I've come up with six problems that need to be resolved if we're going to do it at scale with ATSC3. So I want to go over those 6. The first one is that there has to be a meaningful reach of ATSC3 receivers. So you're showing the stations that'll have coverage, but we still can't deliver to people unless they've purchased either a ATSC3 capable TV or have some type of dongle that is tied into their household. And today, that unless you're a lucky person in Phoenix, that's essentially 0%. And for us, that's an addressable market. So that percentage, the combination of there's a station broadcasting and people have the devices there, that has to reach a meaningful percentage for us. And that percentage has to be probably north of 15% of all households before it's worth our engineering or any CDN's engineering to essentially double our engineering effort to use that as a distribution. Because today we have a means of reaching most of these people, which is internet. Now we've cited edge cases where we don't have good internet, but for those, there's still the edge case. We're focused on for us, our core business is reaching the 95% of people we can reach with an internet connection. So the first thing is there has to be we can only take this seriously once that actual reach is there. Second one, the cost. So it has to cost us less per gigabyte than it's costing us today. And you're showing some numbers there that are very interesting, but there has been tremendous price competition among CDNs. The commercial rate now for delivering data is between 1/10 of a cent and 3/5%, depending if you're Disney or how big you are in the world, per gigabyte. So it's very small. So I did a rough number. If you allocate 6 megahertz of spectrum, and you guys understand whether that, what's the opportunity cost of taking that out, I believe you can get about 25 megabits per second of throughput on that. And if you ran that all day, 24 hours a day, 100% utilization, which is also somewhat difficult, you would deliver 270 gigabytes, which at 0.3 of a cent, which is sort of the going rate, that's 81 cents per receiver, like person that we would want to count. And my question is are there enough people, and is that enough revenue to warrant all the effort that would need to go into it? Thirdly, it has to be reliable. Like
so what's the heading of 2, by the way? If one is
it has to be cost effective. Like, in other words, no one's going to use ATSC broadcast if it's not significantly cheaper than the internet broadcast. It might be artificially encouraged by government mandate or money in order to reach disadvantaged areas. But that's a special use case. It's not a general use case. If you want to be in the business of delivering data, it has to be at a price point that is lower than what is being offered today. And that price goes down about 15% every year for the last 18 years. And you're also getting into a very cutthroat business, because anybody can deliver large files, or so it seems. And you've got 4 big CDNs just in the United States, all competing with each other for large file delivery. And in fact, large providers like Microsoft, when they do their OS updates, they will use 3 or 4 CDNs, multi-CDN delivery. The third item is, again, reliable middleware and receiver software. So we did tests where we had a special dongle and we wired it up and we got it to work. But that's not generally addressable. Just getting files to a television doesn't get them to my phone, which is where I want to watch them in bed, or wherever you might want to do. So we have this problem gap. And it's usually solved by saying, well, we have a Wi-Fi router that can receive it, or it has a USB stick in that can receive ATSC3. But how to get the files out of your television, which is the common receiver, or the dongle, and into your actual consumption device, that's still highly fragmented. So again, it just lowers the addressable reach here. Fourth one is there has to be a back channel to count this, because the OTT world doesn't work on Nielsen type guessing. You can't sample 1% of the people, 1.7% of the people and say, this is how much we delivered, pay us. there has to be a back channel. And we've cited some use cases where there isn't a back channel because there isn't internet connectivity. So accounting for it, data casting is typically a rigid accounting system. Fifth, there needs to be a national coalition of data casters, because CDNs, and I think you're alluding to the CDNs, don't want to go and negotiate individual contracts for stations. There's just not enough people there to make it worth the time. So there has to be some idea of this national network with very simple APIs, where you say, I want to distribute 40 gigabyte file to these households. I know how many exactly I can reach, and I'm going to have one API, push it one place, and it gets distributed. And everybody gets paid, and it's all accounting. And that, to my knowledge, we're not close to delivering that sort of cohesive delivery service. And you get that with CDNs. You get a CDN one file today, we will deliver it to every country in the world. And we will account exactly where it's delivered. We'll give you the billing back. So we need that sort of transparency. The last one, sixth, is the competition again, as alluded to there, is with 4G and 5G services. They've been able to multicast as well with eMBMS since 2017. And they will do it more so. And I think the price point you're showing there for data is probably artificially high. Their price point for data is coming down, especially with 5G. They've got fiber backhaul now to every single tower, and they're getting denser and denser towers. And it may not be true for rural areas, but in any sort of urban area, the ability to multicast content is becoming available. We are doing trials in India right now for multicasting over 5G. And the price point is far lower than what's being suggested in your competitor. So, and the disadvantage is everybody has a multicast receiver in their pocket today. Well, not everybody, but 80% of the United States has a multicast receiver in their pocket. And that's, people are going to start leveraging that channel. So that's an additional competition.
Well, I mean, clearly not necessarily germane to this NAB audience, but we probably ought to have a conversation, Will, on what's going on in India, at least from our perspective, and some intense cooperation that's going on through IIT Kanpur, and it's all centered around 5G, leveraging 5G, and leveraging terrestrial. As you know, Geo launched its 4G network based on the assumption that eMBMS would fulfill a big part of the network demand, particularly for for live content and programmatic content that plays as live, and I think everybody knows that eMBMS was highly flawed. You have FEMBMS coming, roaring down the pike. But again, one of the issues is the dependency on unicast. So we should have a discussion about India separately. But I want to welcome Peter. Peter has joined us from IBM.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. Sorry, joined late.
I know that Peter knows some of this activity that's going on, in terms of data offload. Peter and IBM are engaged with one of our Indian companies in the analytics and sort of the back end side of that offload strategy. But welcome, Peter. Yeah, you jumped right into the middle of talking about what what the opportunities are, and by the way, what the nobody has ever said that any of this is going to be easy. But what are the hurdles? And I think Will did a good job of putting on the table the what certainly I would say is known to our organization, known to a lot of organizations that are not in television broadcasting, but our focus viewers in this activity are television broadcasters, like it or not, and I know that all of you can probably appreciate how difficult. That's probably the hardest task in the world, is to get is to get, you know, more than two broadcasters to agree to work together to make something happen. But there is an economic imperative, I think, that's at work that's driving that, and you know, it's what's happening in across all platforms. And while COVID has been good for a resurgence of traditional television, by the way, even in India, the resurgence of classical, you know, some of the Indian classic programming has made a huge resurgence, but at the same time is troubled and plagued by the lack of, outside of satellite, by the way, satellite is the predominant distribution source for broadcast. It's known as broadcast in India, not terrestrial.
Right.
But Peter, what, I mean, why don't you throw in, you know, 5 minutes of your perspective on this as well?
Yeah. And so, Will, maybe you could, you know, help me vet some of this, but I'd done a little bit of research when we were working with some colleagues in India around video offload. And one of the aspects that I investigated, because I had talked to several CTOs from big telcos, and their initial complaint seemingly was unrelated to anything we were doing. And their discussion was, the biggest expense they have is the cost of electricity. And, you know, what could IBM do to help them reduce the cost of, you know, running their business? And, you know, the initial approach was, yeah, we could do server consolidation and this and that. And I did a very simple thing. I said, what is it costing them to distribute video? And what I found out was, on a 4G network, it costs 60 cents an hour per stream of HD video. And that's a lot. That's what it costs them. And if you think of 4G, the cost, I think, would go up when it's 5G, because the amount of amplifiers needed, the amount of antennas are going to increase. And I think that has a financial impact, as far as maybe it's worthwhile to leverage the broadcast spectrum, especially for, you know, content that's, you know, live content that's viewed by millions of people. Easier to do, less expensive, more efficient way to do the distribution, and probably more cost effective. And maybe the best way they could save money on electricity is to offload that video and work with a broadcaster. That's what I had found. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's, you know, the perfect truth, but that's what I had found. And I don't know if it's something you've looked at.
So yeah, the data number is interesting. So we're looking at an alternative solution to that problem with Geo. We have a trial right now where they lower their cost by essentially multicasting over their network. So instead of sending out 100 streams to all these phones, they just devote essentially 2 channels. It's the equivalent of 2, and then those 100 phones can receive it. So your cost per channel falls by the inverse of the number of people subscribed, and they make sure it's a certain number of threshold people have to be on each tower, and then they get the economics. And this, for them, their cricket is their driver of
IPL drives everything.
IPL, and it's, you know, it's coming up now. Well, it probably is canceled because of COVID, but typically we've set our absolute worldwide traffic peak. We set in India on mobile devices, which was 23 million concurrent users, which is a lot of people watching the same stream, and we unicast every single one of those streams over their cellular network. It worked. Now, what we want to do is raise the quality. We would rather they multicast a nice looking picture than they unicast a crappy looking picture, to be honest.
Yeah, sure.
But we should also, India is a very different market in economics and network topology to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think the United States, we're better off in many aspects. We have better structured networks. We have much higher aggregate throughput. We have better peering. We have better stability, and we also have an economics that are quite different. We don't have a dominant national telco provider. We have strong competition, but, you know, we also suffer from reach problems as well, and we suffer from very strong ISPs who tend to fight each other for.
Sure.
Well, I think there's an intersecting piece that you know, that we always tend to look at. Which, you know, part of it intersects with what Peter said, part of it intersects what you said, Will, and it certainly impacts, you know, the kind of propositions that that Mark and Brian spoke to. But the very nature of the spectrum that we occupy. You know, one of the bigger issues for GEO, for example, was you're dealing in 2 gig spectrum, and so the ability of 2G to feed devices even in moderate indoor environments is a rather substantial hurdle. The cost that Peter's talking about in terms of 5G is wholly dependent on density, and again, there's an intersect there of what spectrum is made available. So part of what you know, I keep glancing across these 6 factors that you brought up, Will, and one of the you know, when I go to point number 1, reach. Not only is it a reach from the standpoint of, geez, we've got transmitters and we've got these DMAs and we've got this coverage, but we've been very focused on really looking at the requirements of service, not coverage, because reach is really about all the way to that end consumer. You know, the 1952 view of the world that the FCC holds for TV stations doesn't answer the question of reaching people, and reach as well. You know, when I think about it, in a word that you use, meaningful, again, spectrum comes into play there. Now, sometimes you know, I'm trying to shoehorn solutions because we've got some of these assets, but at the same time, you know, the reaching of mobile devices directly. In India, the term that's becoming more and more used is direct to mobile, right? And that's what the strategy you're talking about with GEO is. It's about direct to mobile. And by the way, GEO has got a warehouse, literally a warehouse of accessory devices for telephones that they would have deployed had eMBMS been successful, that would allow these telephone devices to become the de facto receiver in the home. They've got these little kits that plug into their phones that output, by the way, composite video as one of the output sources to drive conventional television sets, but it just didn't work. And we're not trying to solve India's problems, but I'm using India as an example that you know this X factor that broadcast has, which is one to many. You can argue multicast is very similar, although I think that, you know, there's a reason that 3GPP continues to try to evolve eMBMS and now FEMBMS and other trials such as 5G XCast and others that have really been looking at a true broadcast bearer to drive those efficiencies.
Mark, just on that point, I think that it's everything you're saying about India and GEO and eMBMS release 14, for example, is true to date. However, there's a dangerous complacency. If broadcasters decide eMBMS no longer a threat, it's not working today, I don't see it working in India. I think they will solve. So in 3 years' time, I think it will be working, and then that's where broadcasters
listen. I will not concede to complacency on my part, and I'm glad that you raised that term, because it is that complacency that we're trying to turn into the driver with these opportunities. And you know, and look, we've only touched the surface on some of the opportunities, but you know, we tend to look at mobile and the automobile as one of those pieces that we can most immediately address. We're working, by the way, I'm looking at Mark O'Brien, in that first responder domain that you mentioned. We're working with one of those phone manufacturers that services those you know, that service segment as an alternative for you know, AT&T and FirstNet.
Mhm. Hey, Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a hard stop at 1. So I was thinking maybe we should make sure we cover what the leave behind talking points are. And there's a couple of things that bullet points that are jumping out at me in this discussion that I think maybe we want to kind of orient around. One of them is the economies that you're talking about are real, but they're only real for certain types of content. In other words, we can't send a million different pieces of content to a million people. That's not what we do.
Mhm.
But what are the use cases where there is the same content that benefits from the one-to-many, the efficiencies that you're talking about? It might be movies, it might be entertainment. In public safety, it's the helicopter video that everyone wants to see. There are certain things that fall neatly into that category.
Mhm.
And I think what we want to leave the people who view this webcast with is not a Pollyanna, we can solve all the problems. We know we can't, we're not saying that. But there are certain things we really can do a terrific job on, and we want to highlight what some of those are. Another talking point is the user experience. So Will held up his phone and said it has to get to this device. Well, that's a core of ATSC3 that we can't do today, that's going to change. And the other thing is, Will mentioned return path. And what we focus on in our public safety work, and to a lesser extent in the education world, is when we talk about what we can do, that people universally say, well, that's fantastic, but how do I talk back? How do I do this? And so my answer to that is that no wireless network is perfect. Every wireless network has its strengths and it has its limitations, every single one. With LTE, it's coverage and it's one-to-one scalability. With LMR, it's voice only, it's not data. With data casting and broadcasting, it's one way, it's not two-way. But they all bring strengths. So it's how do you combine these together into an ecosystem that has a user experience that is seamless. So a person who is consuming content has a device. We're one of the pathways into that device. Other networks are pathways in and out of that device. And the user, frankly, doesn't care. How do I get the best experience with the most seamless user interface at the lowest cost is what I think the ultimate problem is that we're trying to solve. And that's what we're focusing on and what we do. So when we talk to people, it's not about broadcasting is better than something else. It's when you add broadcasting in, it all becomes better. The user experience becomes better. The costs go down. The efficiencies improve, and you get content you never had access to before.
Right. Well, if we take the 6 factors that that Will raised, it's incumbent on broadcasters to build out a meaningful reach. This 3-year window to the next possibility on the part of the telcos to close the divide on the broadcast multicast side is very meaningful. The reason I brought up the core activity of ATSC, the developing of a broadcast core, is there needs to be a meaningful way for the access to our spectrum and access to that reach and access to the connected population. That has to be enabled, and a lot of thoughts that we've brought to the table, and the reason that ATSC is taking up this activity to develop a broadcast core is really comes back to sort of an analogy of what goes on with dynamic spectrum sharing, and what kind of infrastructure has been built for CBRS, and that's been hobbled and by various plaguing issues on the regulatory front, largely more than anything. But to your point, Mark, if broadcast was easy to access, if the reach was understood, if the proliferation of product that allowed that content to be delivered to the endpoint, if all of those things came together, then I think there's a meaningful opportunity but it means we got to work quickly. Will's not waiting around.
Yep.
I'm floored. Will, again, 2016, and if we could have had the level of engagement that we now have with Spectrum Co., soon to be called BitPath, by the way, they're going to be making a big push in releasing some of the opportunities based on the build-outs that are going to happen. I mean, it's all those things that get tied together, Mark, that add at least a glimmer of hope to what this ATSC3 activity has been focused on. Your thoughts, Will and Peter?
Again, before we run out of time, when are we actually recording this session? And can we spend just a few minutes going through like the mechanics? We're going to sign up early. We're going to have an intro. We're going to get some structure to this.
I think I'll be quite honest. I think that we probably need to come together for one more half-hour session. Out of this, Josh's job is to sort of script the time. And I've been taking notes. I think everything that was put on the table was extremely on target. And Will, I'm not worried about you putting on the doorstep of broadcasters that they got to move. You've got your business, and your business is not waiting for us. But if your business could leverage us, I'm sure you would. To your economic advantage, to the advantage of your consumers.
It's all economics at the end of the day, unfortunately. And I think if ATSC can structure the package, but based upon some of the things I mentioned there, then it's a no-brainer. It would be attractive to us and other CDNs. But until that point, it wouldn't be. But I hope this is a broadcast audience. I hope we can end on a positive note. I wanted to be able to present what I see as necessary foundation for this to be a business in the data costing world as we see it, but still not discourage people, but just have them be realistic station owners, that this is not some oil well they're going to tap and get rich on. This is going to take work, cooperation, coordination, and even then they're entering into a very challenging business already.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right.
I think the most valuable thing broadcasters have is spectrum.
Hey, Josh, I want to say, do me one favor. Just disable your video for a moment. I want to see if it goes back to 4 screens. Because I'm just, I've never used Zoom as the base. So let's see. I think I can disable. I can remove.
Just disable.
You can switch to a grid view.
Yeah. So no, I'm just thinking that this view of 4 is a good is a good view as we get into the conversation.
Right.
Now is Josh, are you still there? No, I actually. I threw him out.
You uninvited him.
That's all right. So I'm going to let Josh, if you could spare another half hour at some point in the future. This has got to be done. I'd like to get this done on Thursday, I'm thinking. I'll let Josh organize, a slot to do this on Thursday. And then I'm going to take a look at.
Record the actual event Thursday and have a prep session before Thursday? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. One more, just a half hour. We'll outline, discuss that outline. But I think look at it. The free flow is this was meant to be sort of the 4 of us on the Diaz sitting together and having a meaningful conversation. And I think all of this was extremely enlightening. So, all right, it's we got 1 minute to spare. I'll let you all go, and we'll organize one more session, a half hour roundup, and I thank you all for participating.
Great, thanks for setting it up.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
All right, take care. Nice seeing you, Will.
You too. I like it that everybody's at home. It's this nice.
Yep.
Exactly.
Makes it more real. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
All right, take care.